This new culture was very much seen as a rival to the old and still very much alive culture of rural America. One of the battlegrounds, of course, will be Prohibition. By 1921, the problems with Prohibition are already evident. Now remember, Prohibition had largely come from the rural communities and had been heavily opposed by the cities. And, of course, most of the drinking was being done in the cities, and so you have cities which largely weren't interested in Prohibition suffering the consequences. It did stop consumption in some places. In fact, if you lived in the countryside, it probably almost certainly completely stopped consumption. But it completely failed in other places. Well, and by the way, I love this picture because here you see people who would never be allowed into a bar today. These girls are underage, drinking freely with these guys. Well, because they're all drinking illegally, so you lose the ability to regulate when you prohibit something, and that's one unintended consequence. Another was organized crime. Now, Prohibition not only split us along urban and rural lines, it split us along age lines. And drinking became kind of a symbol of this new culture, and it was heavily associated in the popular imagination with enormous amounts of violent crime. Now, these are blown way out of proportion. The 20s were not near as violent because of Prohibition as we imagine them to be today. There's been many more people killed in movies over Prohibition in the 20s than there ever were in real life. But it was real, and it did happen. Al Capone, who ironically becomes famous as kind of the most, is the greatest of these organized crime lords, was actually one of the least successful because Chicago, he was unable to control it, and so it kept breaking out into violence. Whereas other cities like New York or Atlantic City, the crime lords there had quite a bit of control, and we didn't see things like the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But right from the beginning, even while it was happening, it was glorified in movies. The Scarface movie there is more or less from the period. As Wets, those are people who support ending Prohibition, grew in number and power, they began to push back against Prohibition. There you see the We Want Beer. I love the soldiers over here demanding beer. And even women in the cities would often get behind this effort. But Prohibition wasn't ended by any of that. Prohibition was ended when FDR, when he becomes elected president in 1932, in 1933, he suggests that one way to fight the Great Depression would be to end Prohibition because it would create all these jobs making alcohol, which is true. And so Prohibition really ends as one of FDR's job programs in the New Deal. People don't talk about that much, but that's actually why Prohibition ended. Remember, Prohibition had largely been an anti-immigrant movement to begin with, and the association of immigrants with radicals in the new Red Scare will lead to further restrictions on immigration. In 1921, we established a quota system, and what it says is that as many immigrants could come in a year as equal to 3% of that nation's immigrants in America in the year 1890. Well, what that does is it basically goes back before the period of massive Eastern and Southern European immigration, sets the numbers according to that, and it allows plenty of French and German and even Irish immigrants in, while severely restricting places like Italy, Poland, and Russia. Immigration falls from 800,000 to 300,000 because of this law. The nativists aren't satisfied, though. By 1924, we get the National Origins Act, which bans Asians altogether, so not just Chinese, but Asians total, and drops the quota to 2%. I'm sorry, the first one was the 1910 census. The second one is the 1890 census, so this severely restricts the new immigrants, I should say. By the way, there's this great cartoon where you see that these guys who are telling the immigrant not to come in, of course, are either immigrants or from immigrants themselves. By 1929, we capped the number of immigrants at 150,000, although in reality fewer than 75,000 make it into the country. Now, remember the KKK back in the Reconstruction era? And it had its heyday, and then Grant sent the U.S. Army down to shut it down, and it pretty much disappeared. But in the 1920s, it'll be back with a vengeance, actually beginning in 1915, when the new Ku Klux Klan is founded in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Now, this is a different Ku Klux Klan. I mean, it's effectively the same, but it was not continuously operating from Reconstruction into this period. This new Klan is largely directed against Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. They don't like black people either, but they've widened their focus of hatred. The Jew Leo Frank is lynched in the South and makes it clear that this is a new and different Klan with a different list of enemies. Now, the Klan's resurgence of popularity is due to something that I experienced as a kid. No, not the Klan. When I was 5, Star Wars came out, and me and every other little kid I knew played Star Wars all the time. All we wanted to do was be Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. The impetus for the new Klan was D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, where he shows the heroic story about how the Southern guys dress up in their robes and go murder all the black people who are trying to rape the white women. It's all nonsense historically, of course, but it encourages this heroism, this deification of the Klan in the same way that I thought Star Wars was the greatest thing ever. People back then were obsessed with Birth of a Nation. By the way, Woodrow Wilson, who's from South Carolina, called Birth of a Nation history written with lightning. The Klan was strong not only in the South. We always associate the South with racism, like the rest of the country was some sort of utopia for minorities. But it was actually as strong in the Midwest. And if you're talking about racism against Asians, that was very strong in the West Coast. But let's stick with the Klan for now. It had 4 million members at its peak, and it was an open organization. They would hold picnics, they would hold dances. I've talked to older people who would talk about going to Klan picnics all the time, like that was just the most normal thing in the world. The strongest state for the Klan wasn't Mississippi, wasn't Alabama, it was Indiana. And in fact, Indiana and Ohio both elect Klansmen as governors. I don't mean they elect some guy who they later found out was secretly in the Klan. I mean they elect guys who give their public addresses in Klan robes at their rallies for the election. They ran on the idea that they were good Klansmen. Parades, rallies, picnics, these were all common features of the Klan. Here you see them parading in this massive parade. You'll notice a few things about this. One, they're marching on Pennsylvania Avenue. 2, they're carrying American flags. They see themselves as incredibly American. I think the question of what does it mean to be American is one of the fundamental questions in all of U.S. history, because I think hopefully most of you watching this think this isn't what it means to be American. But the thing that's most astonishing to me about this picture is look at their faces. They're wearing the robes, they're wearing the hoods, but the hoods are up. You can totally see who these people are. There's no shame here. There's pride here in being in the Klan. They were terrorists. The Klan is America's largest, most successful, longest-running terrorist organization. They practiced things like whipping, tarring and feathering, lynching, of course, arson. And they saw themselves as the defenders of the traditional order. They would publicly lynch people. They would invite people to these lynchings. It was horrible, cruel, terrible things. They would beat people, hang them, set them on fire, cut off their genitalia while they were still alive, and then shoot them. These were horrible, despicable, violent people. But they saw themselves as soldiers in this war to stop the new society from coming. These were the conservative, rural people who were horrified by the new America that was emerging out of this age of urbanization and consumerism.